On July 23, 2024, at 9:53 in the morning, visitors walking the Biscuit Basin boardwalk in Yellowstone National Park heard a sound they could not immediately identify. Then the ground opened. Black Diamond Pool erupted in a hydrothermal explosion. The blast sent steam and debris hundreds of feet into the air. It destroyed a nearby boardwalk. It ejected grapefruit-sized rocks tens to hundreds of feet from the source. The explosion deposited over 1,400 rocks, with a long dimension greater than 16 inches around the pool. Some blocks closest to the explosion site were about 3 feet wide and weighed hundreds of pounds. Pack times. The boardwalk that was destroyed had been full of visitors minutes earlier. A family had walked off it and returned to their car shortly before the explosion occurred. The area is closed and has remained closed. The pool at the center of the explosion has been erupting unpredictably ever since. Scientists installed a new camera at Biscuit Basin to document ongoing activity at Black Diamond Pool. Many eruptions in 2025 threw material 30 to 40 feet into the air. There were also very small ones that behaved like a bubble burst. The activity has been decidedly unpredictable. The reopening of Biscuit Basin remains unlikely in 2026. That explosion was not caused by volcanic activity. The USGS was clear about that. It resulted from water suddenly transitioning to steam in the shallow hydrothermal plumbing system beneath the pool. Silica accumulation had sealed off some of the conduits, leading to a pressure increase until the system released. Pack times. No magma was involved, no eruption was in progress, no alert level was changed, and yet a boardwalk that had been carrying human beings was obliterated by an event that had no warning, produced no precursors detectable on any instrument, and occurred in one of the most visited areas of the most visited national park in the United States. This is where the real Yellowstone story lives, not in the super eruption scenario that fills YouTube thumbnails and dominates online searches. In the thing that actually happened, that no monitoring system predicted, that sent 3-foot rocks through the air where families had been walking minutes before. The hazard at Yellowstone that is most likely to injure or kill visitors and residents is not the one everybody talks about. The most likely geologic hazards on human timescales are strong tectonic earthquakes, like the magnitude 7, 3 that occurred at Hebgen Lake in 1959, and hydrothermal explosions like the July 23, 2024 explosion at Biscuit Basin, the Salvation Army. Not a super eruption, not a caldera collapse, hydrothermal explosions and earthquakes. Events that do not require a planetary catastrophe to be lethal. Events that happen without warning. Events that have already happened, recently, in places where people were standing. To understand what Yellowstone actually is, as opposed to what the internet has decided it is, you have to start with the correct frame. Yellowstone is not primarily a volcano waiting to erupt. It is a hydrothermal system sitting on top of a magmatic heat source, and the hydrothermal system is the part that is actively dangerous on timescales that matter to human beings who are alive right now. The caldera itself is one of the largest volcanic features on Earth. Yellowstone National Park sits atop a giant supervolcano known as the Yellowstone Caldera, spanning parts of Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, where the magma is just 3 to 8 miles below the surface. The 30 by 45 mile caldera has been undergoing episodes of uplift and subsidence for thousands of years. RNZ. The system has produced 3 super eruptions in its geological history. 2, 1 million years ago, 1, 3 million years ago, and 640,000 years ago. Each of those eruptions was catastrophic on a continental scale. Each produced ash deposits that stretched across the entire North American continent. The last one created the caldera that the park now occupies. These are real events. They are not fiction. But here is what the USGS scientist who knows the system best has said about the probability of another one. Michael Poland, the scientist in charge of the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, has been on this point to a degree that rarely makes it into the coverage of Yellowstone. Poland says the chances of a major eruption in the Yellowstone caldera within the human timeline are as close to 0 as it gets. As close to 0 as it gets. Not imminent, not building. Not something that 300 million Americans need to lose sleep over in 2026. The magma chamber beneath Yellowstone is mostly solid. A scientific paper published in 2025 concluded that there's a low percentage of molten material in Yellowstone's magma chamber, which greatly reduces the chances of an eruption. The Daily Caller. For a super eruption to occur, the magma system would need to produce signals that are dramatically different from what scientists are currently seeing. Prior to any volcanic eruption, there would be dramatic increases in the rates of deformation and obvious shallowing of the deformation source, coupled with major increases in seismicity, as well as changes in gas emissions and thermal output. The Salvation Army. None of those conditions exist at Yellowstone today. Yellowstone caldera activity remains at background levels with 61 located earthquakes in March, the largest being a magnitude 1. 9. Deformation measurements indicate a pause in the uplift that had been occurring along the North Caldera Rim since July 2025. Samaritan's Purse. And yet, something has been happening at Yellowstone in the past year that is genuinely unusual, genuinely significant, and genuinely not a sign of the apocalypse, which makes it exactly the kind of story that gets either ignored or catastrophized, when the reality is far more interesting than either response. In July 2025, GPS instruments in Yellowstone began detecting something unexpected. An area on the north rim of Yellowstone caldera, to the south of Norris Geyser Basin, started to uplift slightly. Similar deformation occurred in the same area during 1996 to 2004. R and Z. This area, which scientists have named the Norris Uplift Anomaly, is a stretch of ground roughly 19 miles across, approximately the footprint of the city of Chicago. The ground across this massive swath of the park rose about an inch since July 2025. 1 inch, over 6 months, across an area the size of a major American city. The instrument detected it. The satellite radar confirmed it. And the scientific community began asking the question that the USGS scientist in charge described as the story of the year for 2025. The caldera had been undergoing overall subsidence since 2015 at a rate of about 2 to 3 centimeters per year, interrupted each summer by a seasonal pause or slight uplift. The summertime pause in 2025 did not end in October or November like it usually does. Scientists asked whether this was the start of a new phase of caldera uplift like that, which occurred many times in the past, most recently during 2004 to 2009 and 2014 to 2015. That question has now been answered. Continuous GPS stations indicate that the uplift that started in July 2025 on the North Caldera Rim ceased by mid-January 2026. Samaritan's Purse. The uplift stopped. The ground is no longer rising. The anomaly completed itself without escalating, exactly as similar episodes in the same area have done before. In 1996 to 2004, when the area rose about 5 inches over 8 years and then stopped. But the question that the anomaly raised is still scientifically open. And the answer to it matters more than most coverage of Yellowstone has acknowledged. What caused the uplift? The USGS is precise in its uncertainty here. Scientists know that deformation is usually triggered by processes like fault motion, accumulation or withdrawal of magma, or changes in hydrothermal fluids. That depth, deeper than the hydrothermal system typically operates, makes magma a likely source, though scientists are not worried about eruption because those signs are not present. Magma is a likely source, not magma accumulating toward eruption. Magma existing in a system that has always had magma, moving in ways that have been observed before, at depths that are consistent with the normal operation of a volcanic system that last erupted 70,000 years ago. The most recent volcanic eruption at Yellowstone occurred 70,000 years ago and was a lava flow that resulted in the formation of Pitchstone Plateau in the south part of the park. The Salvation Army, 70,000 years, not 640,000 years, which is the age of the last super eruption. 70,000 years since the last lava flow. The system is active, it is not quiet. And the most recent activity, that's the uplift, the hydrothermal explosions, the geyser changes, is part of an ongoing dynamic system that scientists monitor continuously and understand better than any other volcanic system in the United States. Here is what happened at Norris Geyser Basin in the months surrounding the uplift, because it illustrates why Yellowstone's real hazard profile is more complex and more immediate than the super eruption narrative captures. A small hydrothermal explosion at Norris Geyser Basin created a new thermal pool that probably formed in a series of mildly explosive events between late December 2024 and early February 2025. The pool is about 13 feet across. The rocks and white silica mud surrounding it were ejected as the feature formed. FEMA. No one witnessed it. No instruments detected it in real time. Geologists discovered the new crater in spring 2025 when they noticed the ground had changed. An explosion had occurred in winter, in a part of the park where visitors walk daily in summer, and the monitoring network did not catch it as it happened. Scientists installed infrasound arrays, instruments that detect low-frequency acoustic signals, as a direct response to this limitation. The 2024 explosion at Biscuit Basin was the first hydrothermal explosion ever detected instrumentally at Yellowstone in real time. The previous one, at Norris, was discovered months after the fact. Echinus Geyser, which had been dormant for several years, reawakened in February 2026 with about 40 eruptions that month before going quiet again in March. FEMA. Steamboat Geyser, the world's tallest active geyser, had 48 eruptions in 2019 and 2020 and dropped to just 3 in 2025, a clear indication that an active phase is winding down. Black Diamond Pool continues its unpredictable activity, with eruptions ranging from bubble burst splashes to 30 to 40-foot water and mud columns, and the boardwalk it destroyed remains closed. The system is changing. Not toward eruption, toward something less dramatic and more hazardous on a human scale. A pattern of unpredictable hydrothermal activity in areas that millions of people visit annually, monitored by a sensor network that is still learning how to detect events that leave no warning in the data until they have already occurred. Now understand what the super eruption scenario actually means. Not because it is imminent, but because the scale of it is the reason the monitoring program matters, regardless of probability. Models of a Yellowstone super eruption predict it would drop thousands of feet of ash within the park radius and coat communities stretching from Missoula, Montana to Albuquerque, New Mexico. RNZ, the ash fall from a full super eruption would be measured in feet within several hundred miles of the park, in inches across most of the continental United States, and in detectable deposits across parts of Canada. Huge amounts of ash and gas launched into the stratosphere would act as aerosols, sunlight, and plunging the Earth into a prolonged period of cold and dark. The agricultural system of North America would fail within a single growing season. The electrical grid across the affected region would be compromised by the weight and conductivity of wet ash. Jet engines would be destroyed by the abrasive particulate in the atmosphere, grounding the entire aviation system. Water treatment systems would be overwhelmed by ash contamination. The economic system of the world's largest economy would essentially stop. This is not a scenario that requires dramatization. The honest numbers are sufficiently extraordinary that presenting them accurately is more compelling than exaggerating them. And the scientists who study the system most carefully are the ones who are simultaneously most clear about the catastrophic potential and most insistent that the timeline for a super eruption is geological, measured in tens of thousands of years, not in any human planning horizon. What they are less insistent about is the hydrothermal hazard. Yellowstone Volcano Observatory's response plan was developed because hydrothermal explosions, not volcanic eruptions, are the geological hazards most likely to impact people in Yellowstone National Park, and their frequency is poorly understood. The first instrumentally detected hydrothermal explosion in the Yellowstone region occurred only in April 2024, the Salvation Army. The first one ever instrumentally detected, in a park that receives 4 to 5 million visitors every year, that has been monitored by the USGS for decades, that has had hydrothermal explosions throughout its recorded history. The science of detecting these events in real time is less than 2 years old. YVO enhanced several monitoring capabilities during 2025. 3 seismic sites were upgraded to fully digital, and a new seismic station was installed in the northeast part of the park. A hydrothermal monitoring station consisting of a seismometer, infrasound array, and GPS station was installed at Biscuit Basin. RNZ. These are direct responses to the recognition that the existing network had a gap, that hydrothermal explosions were occurring in visitor areas without sufficient precursor detection. The monitoring is getting better. It is not yet good enough. The Biscuit Basin boardwalk that was destroyed on July 23, 2024, had been carrying visitors that morning. The explosion occurred at 9:53 a.m. on a summer Tuesday. It sent 3-foot rocks through the air. It was not caused by volcanic activity. It had no precursors visible on any instrument, and it happened at a site that the USGS now monitors continuously with a dedicated camera and sensor array, because they did not have that capability before it happened. That is the Yellowstone story. Not 300 million Americans in a death zone, not a sleeping giant on the verge of awakening. A dynamic, active hydrothermal system in one of the most visited landscapes on Earth, where the hazards that are most likely to affect people in the near term have no warning, leave no precursors, and are still being understood by a monitoring network that is adding new sensors in direct response to events it was not equipped to detect when they occurred. The North Caldera Rim uplift has paused. The caldera's activity remains at background levels. The largest earthquake in March 2026 was a magnitude 1.9 Samaritan's Purse. There is no imminent eruption. There is no escalating crisis that the USGS is managing behind the curtain of reassuring press releases. The scientists who monitor this system every day are doing so transparently, publishing their data, answering questions, and saying clearly what the hazard profile looks like and what it does not look like. What they cannot tell you is when the next hydrothermal explosion will occur, in which part of the park, or whether the boardwalk nearest to it will be empty when it does. Hydrothermal explosions typically occur in Yellowstone 1 to a few times per year, but often in the backcountry where they may not be immediately detected. Pack times, 1 to a few times per year, in a park of 3,500 square miles where 4 to 5 million people walk the thermal areas each summer. Most of them in the backcountry, most of them undetected. The one that destroyed the Biscuit Basin boardwalk was exceptional in scale and location, not exceptional in that it occurred. The super eruption is as close to zero as it gets, in the words of the scientist who watches this mountain full time, but the ground at Yellowstone is still moving in ways that the instruments are still learning. To read, The hydrothermal system is still producing explosions that leave no warning in the data, and the boardwalk at Biscuit Basin is still closed because the pool at its center is still erupting unpredictably, throwing mud and water and rock into the air on a schedule that no monitoring system on Earth can currently predict. That is what Yellowstone actually is in 2026, not a doomsday clock. A dynamic, hazardous, poorly understood hydrothermal system sitting on top of one of the most powerful magmatic systems on the planet in a national park, with 4 to 5 million visitors a year, where the danger that is most real is not the one that everyone is searching for.